This is a very special Throwback Thursday edition. This goes back to 1969, one of the all-time Disney classics, The Love Bug. Jim was a race car driver. He liked fancy cars with big motors. He liked to look at all the new cars in the showroom. But he did not have enough money to buy one. Mr. Thorndyke tried to sell Jim a long, shiny yellow car. But Jim only had $50. It was not enough to buy any car. Not even that little white one that looked so out of place in the showroom. Mr. Thorndyke was angry. "Get out," he said to Jim. Jim left the showroom through the front door. Just then, Mr. Thorndyke's helper pushed the little white car out the back door. When Jim got on the cable car, the white car followed behind all the way home, and no one was driving it. "What am I going to do for a racing car?" Jim said to his friend Tennessee when he got home. "Why don't you borrow one?" "I never win a race, so no one wants to lend me even a little one," said Jim as he slumped in a chair. Suddenly, someone knocked at the door. Jim went to see who was there. It was a policeman. He pointed to the little white car. "Is that your car?" he asked Jim. "No," said Jim, "but I saw it in the showroom earlier." "I'm afraid you will have to come with me." "But I didn't steal it," cried Jim. "You can explain that to the owner," said the policeman. Jim and his friend went to the showroom with the policeman. The little white car was hitched to the police tow truck. It went to the showroom too. In the back of the showroom, they saw a young woman. She was working on the engine of a fancy red race car. "Hi, my name is Carol," she said. "I'm Mr. Thorndyke's mechanic." "Where is Mr. Thorndyke?" asked the policeman. "Here he is now," Carol said as Mr. Thorndyke came through the door. "So you found the car thief," he said to the policeman. "I am not a car thief," Jim insisted. "I don't know how that white car got to my house." "Say, Jim," said Tennessee, "I think that car likes you. Why don't you buy it?" "Cars don't like people," said Jim. "And I don't like this car. Even if I did, I don't have enough money to buy it." Mr. Thorndyke looked at his watch. "I'm in a hurry and I really want to sell this car. Just pay what you have now and you can owe me the rest." Jim really did need a car, so he gave Mr. Thorndyke his $50. Tennessee named the little white car Herbie. He worked very hard to get Herbie ready for the race at the fairgrounds. He cleaned the motor and washed and polished the outside. But right from the start, the little car seemed to have a mind of its own. The car always went where it wanted to go. No matter which way Jim turned the steering wheel, Herbie went its own way. On the day of the race, Herbie took the fastest way to the fairgrounds. Before they knew it, Jim and Tennessee found themselves sitting on the racetrack at the starting line. The flag went up. The race started. Herbie passed car after car. Soon, there was only one car left. It was the red car driven by Mr. Thorndyke. With a sudden burst of speed, Herbie passed the red car. Herbie was first across the finish line. He won! Everyone was cheering. But Mr. Thorndyke wasn't cheering. He was very angry. "I will get even," he shouted. Mr. Thorndyke was not a very good loser. Herbie became famous in the next few months. He won every race that Jim entered, and he set new speed records too. Mr. Thorndyke began to think he was having eye trouble. He kept seeing a small white car whiz by him. One day, Mr. Thorndyke was talking to Carol. "That rotten little car is driving me buggy," he said. "Why do you keep blaming the car?" said Carol. "Maybe Jim is a better driver." "Impossible. It must be the car," he shouted. "I must do something." The day before the Riverside race, Tennessee cleaned and polished the little car. He worked all day. There was nothing more he could do. Herbie was in perfect shape. That night, Tennessee heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, he saw Mr. Thorndyke. "I came to have a closer look at your fine little car," he said. "I thought you didn't like Herbie," said Tennessee. "He's been beating you in a lot of races." Mr. Thorndyke laughed. "I can be a good sport, can't I?" "Well, let's have some hot chocolate then. I was just going to make some." "Fine," said Mr. Thorndyke. Tennessee went into the kitchen. He brought out a tray of cookies and a can of whipped cream. "I'll be back with the hot chocolate in a minute," Tennessee said as he went back into the kitchen. "Here is my chance to really mess up this car," Mr. Thorndyke said to himself. Mr. Thorndyke picked up the can of whipped cream. He squirted lots of the cream into Herbie's gas tank. Then he left. When Tennessee came back with the 2 cups, he didn't see Mr. Thorndyke. "That's funny. I wonder why Mr. Thorndyke left without saying goodbye," Tennessee thought. The next day, Jim and Herbie were at the track, ready for the big race. People were cheering. The race began. Herbie quickly passed Mr. Thorndyke's red car. Then he moved far out in front. It looked as though Herbie would win easily. But then the little car coughed. Jim sat up tensely. Herbie was beginning to sputter and slow down. Suddenly, the little car flipped over on its back with a groan. A few gooey white bubbles came out of its tailpipe. Mr. Thorndyke laughed and laughed. He roared to the finish line and won the race. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I think we have seen the last of Jim and his trick car." That evening, Tennessee was looking sadly at Herbie's engine. It was covered with gooey white bubbles. "Poor little fellow," he said. "Who could have done this to you?" He stuck his finger in the white goo and tasted it. It was whipped cream. "Thorndyke!" cried Tennessee. "I should never have left him alone with you, Herbie." "Hi," said a familiar voice. Tennessee looked up and saw Carol. "I don't work for Mr. Thorndyke anymore," she said. "I found out what he did to Jim's car." "You are a mechanic," said Tennessee. "Can you help us? Herbie needs special love and attention. He is a love bug." Carol agreed to work on the little car. An hour later, she finished. "The love bug is in fine shape now," she said with a smile. "Herbie and I want to thank you," said Tennessee happily. The little car made a happy whirring sound. The El Dorado road race was set for the next morning. Carol and Tennessee were going to ride in the race with Jim. They drove to the starting line to wait for the green flag to go up. The green flag was up. It fell. The race started with a roar of engines. How the crowd cheered. The race was a very hard one. The cars had to drive over a twisting mountain road. Herbie seemed happy as he raced along just in front of Mr. Thorndyke's car. As Herbie drove around a sharp curve, Mr. Thorndyke tried to bump him off the road. On the next curve, Mr. Thorndyke tried again and again, but Herbie always held on and went faster. Then Mr. Thorndyke came up from behind and bumped Herbie very hard. Herbie was thrown off the road and into a tree. "Now what do we do?" asked Jim. But suddenly, Herbie gave a big heave and dropped out of the tree with a crash. Then the little car raced wildly up the hill and back to the road. "That blasted car," Mr. Thorndyke said to his helper. "I thought that last bump would wreck it for sure, but it just keeps going." Soon they caught up with Mr. Thorndyke's car. Then they passed him again. Both cars were coming to the finish line. Herbie was still out in front. Mr. Thorndyke's car was close behind. Suddenly, Jim heard a ripping noise. It was coming from above. "There's a crack in Herbie's roof," shouted Carol. Then Jim heard a strange snapping sound. It was coming from below. "There is a crack in Herbie's floorboard," shouted Tennessee. At that very moment, Herbie came apart. Mr. Thorndyke's bumping had damaged him. His front half broke away from his back half. Tennessee was left with the engine in the back, and Jim and Carol were left with the steering wheel. Mr. Thorndyke laughed. "Too bad," he shouted as he passed Jim. But then a strange thing happened. Both halves of Herbie kept going. Mr. Thorndyke passed Jim, who was in the front of Herbie. Tennessee, in the back half, passed Mr. Thorndyke. Then they crossed the finish line. Herbie was the winner. In fact, he took first and third place in the same race. After the race and the cheering were over, Tennessee welded Herbie back together again. Herbie won many more races for Jim. Mr. Thorndyke gave up racing. He knew that the love bug was just too much for him.